Hey everyone, how are you? It's Phil. Thank you for being here. We will get going in just one moment. Yeah, share my screen and we will get started. Just give me 1 second. Thank you so much. How's everybody doing? Appreciate you being here. We'll see if more people join on. So if we could hold off on, hey Larry, how are you? If we could hold off on any questions in the chat until we kind of finish, happy to take all the all the questions. So, all right, let me call up that presentation, and we'll get going in 1 second. Here, 1 second. All right, so basically, I'm sure as everyone is aware now, we have kind of, let me just make sure I'm sharing my screen. That would help. Hold on. There we go. All right. Is everyone able to see my screen? I believe they should be. We're all good. Perfect. All right. So just a little quick background on, what got us here. So basically, sure everyone is aware at this point that, there was a couple of lawsuits. The National Association of Realtors lost. There had been some settlements with Caldwell Banker, Sotheby's under the Anytime Real Estate moniker, and Remax settled, and then Keller Williams settled, and then eventually NAR settled on March 15th. And then through that settlement agreement, there are some practice changes, that we are all kind of going through right now. So, and those practice changes have to be fully adhered to by August 17th. So it's very close. Some MLSs have taken out the compensation data previously. If it's out, then, kind of the new rules have sort of already kicked in for you. But by August 17th, we are fully engaged in this. So soon, Saturday, right? So anything, many, at this point, we're kind of best off already implementing everything. So, all right. So, I kind of mixing it up a little bit tonight. I wanted to talk about agency, and then we'll kind of get more and why agency now is so important. So it was always important, but it wasn't quite as important, right? Because, many times we worked with buyers without any type of agreement, right? Now it's mandatory that we have an agreement. So we have to understand how we're working with them, and what Dalton Wade's relationship is. So there are three types of agency, right? So for every type of buyer broker agreement, there are actually three different ones. One where we are a single agent, one where we are a transaction broker, and one where we do not have a brokerage relationship. I had an agent, a buyer, he's one of these people, right, that just wants to work with the listing agent. He doesn't believe in a buyer's agent. He thinks he knows better, right? So we're like, okay, fine. And he thinks he's saving money because of this, but actually it's all dictated by the listing agreement. And in this case, the listing agreement was 4%, 2 and 2. So, the listing agent didn't want to represent him, but we still needed something from him, right? A buyer broker agreement. So we always, on every transaction now, we need, and when I say buyer broker agreement, I refer to three things: showing agreement, property pre-touring agreement, and then the full-blown buyer broker agreement. We'll talk more about that in a few slides. So, but anyways, so she gets him to sign the non-brokerage relationship. He doesn't owe her anything, but because, it's all dictated in the listing agreement, in this case, she's getting 4%, or Dalton Wade is getting 4%. So she's going to get still. So he thinks he's saving money, but in actuality, he really isn't. So he'd be better off actually having representation, but that's kind of how he wanted to do it. So, so again, three types: single agent, right? That's the highest form. So that is, you have a fiduciary responsibility when you're a single agent, you can only have one side, right? You can only represent one party, you can't represent both. What allows us to represent in Florida both parties is transaction broker, right? So just popping back to single agent. So we've got to deal honestly, got to be loyal, keep everything confidential. We have to be obedient. We have to do what that seller tells us, unless it's unlawful, right? Full disclosure, accounting for all funds, skill, care, and diligence in the transaction, presenting all offers and counter offers in a timely manner, disclosing all facts that merely affect the value and are not readily observable. And then transaction broker, pretty much few less duties, right? We still have, dealing honestly, loyalty, but we don't have, we have limited confidentiality. So the difference might be, so if, you knew that the sellers, if you're a single agent, if you knew the sellers, the reason why they're selling is because they're getting divorced, you really couldn't tell anyone that, right? Just say, well, I'm not sure. They're just selling. I'm not sure why, right? Because you'd have to keep that confidential. But with a transaction broker, you could say, right? Because you have limited confidentiality. And what has to be kept confidential is what a seller will accept and what a buyer will pay, right? You are presenting an offer, your buyer wants to start at 450, but they're willing to go up to 475, and you submit that offer at 450, and I'm the listing agent. I'm like, hey, it's Friday night, let's wrap this up, let's get this under agreement now. What are they willing to pay? And you tell me, and that would be a violation. Like, you could lose your license, right? Because you didn't keep, if you ever find yourself in that situation, say, I'm not sure, let me get back to you, do you have a counter for me, right? So again, so a little less duty to the client. And then we have non-brokerage relationship, right? So again, we're really not giving much at all, right? So, again, we used to see when they had the commission data in the MLSs, we would see single agent, let's just use 2.5%, transaction broker, 2.5%, non-brokerage relationship, maybe 0, 1%, right? Because they're not doing much, right? So basically, we're not really working with you. You're on your own, Mr. Buyer or Mr. Seller, right? So you can have, like, we see these, they're called entry only listings, flat fee listings, limited service listings. Those usually there's a non-brokerage relationship with the seller. All that brokerage is doing is entering that data in the MLS. So it's very important we understand how we're representing our clients, and then how that kind of interplays when it's Dalton Wade on both sides. So either you as an individual agent, you are the listing agent, and then you found the buyer. So you've got to be neutral, right? You have to, transaction broker. So you can't be a single agent, right? Single agent, you can only represent one side. Transaction broker is kind of what allows us to represent both sides, either one agent, the listing agent, then having the buyer, or two Dalton Wade agents, right? So, and again, if you're the listing agent as a single agent, you have to have, your buyer transition, to transaction broker, right? And then again, so you have that buyer transition. You're now a transaction broker, because that's what allows you to have both sides. And then again, you need something from that buyer, right? Now, again, if a buyer comes to your open house, you don't need anything, right? They're just looking. But if you're actually going in, whether that's your open house or you're conducting that open house for, another agent of Dalton Wade, right? You don't need anything unless you start working with them, unless you're going to write an offer or you're going to take them out and show them other properties, right? So, I was very good at finding clients at open houses, and then, but now I would need to, if I showed them another house or I'm sending in an offer on that listing, I need one of those three things, the showing agreement, the property pre-touring agreement, or the full-blown buyer broker agreement. And we'll talk a little bit, about each one of the three types in a couple slides. All right, so again, let's talk a little bit about the removal of the co-broker data. It's out, right? Can be no mention of any paying any co-broke fees, has, the MLS has taken it out. It can't be in any attachment, can't be in the realtor remarks. It can be nowhere, can't be on showing time. You can't take any site that gets a feed from, MLS and put it there. So it's pretty much, now you have to find out, from the listing agent, what's being offered, right? So again, sellers, they're still able to offer compensation to buyer's agents. That has not changed. It's just mechanically how that gets administered. Before it was very frictionless, like, right, it's in the MLS, it's easy, we know, right? We don't have to ask, it's there. Right now we have to ask, right? And again, we're going to talk a little bit about the listing agreement as well. And then I will kind of show you when you need, so there's two compensation agreements, right? One is broker to buyer broker. So that means the broker is paying the co-broke fee, kind of like it was before, right? The other way is now the seller can pay directly, right, to the buyer's agent. And there's a different box to be checked on the listing agreement. I believe that's going to come up on the next slide. So most of the MLSs have taken the data out. So we are fully, August 17th is right in a couple days, but we are operating pretty much like this now, right? And again, there's some kinks, right? There's some kinks, not so much on Dalton Wade's side, but I am hearing other agents, they're unsure, they don't know which agreements, right? And we're going to explain more so, you can help them. So, to help them, you have to understand it. If you understand it, you can communicate that to them, right? So again, I can't remember who I was talking to, but, he's calling up on every showing, right? And asking. It's a lot more work. Probably what I would do is only call if, my client's interested. I mean, I showed people 40 houses before they sometimes would pull the trigger. We've all experienced buyers like that, right? So again, to call all those listing agents, again, it's a personal decision. There's no right or wrong answer there. It's just, again, we'll find our way. We can call, we can find out, or we can wait and see if our client has interest, right? So again, as soon as they do, right, before we submit the offer, right, before we submit the offer, we want that commission agreement signed by either the listing brokerage or the seller. Why? I had a call yesterday from an agent. He already submitted the offer signed, and now he's kind of naked. He doesn't have the commission agreement. Hopefully he'll get it, or hopefully they'll pay him. He's kind of now working on trust instead of having like an enforceable document. Right. So we want that before we submit the offer. And hopefully, again, right, the listing agent is on top of their game and they already have whatever form they need to say yes. Most listings, I mean, are still offering compensation. That hasn't changed much, at least from what I'm hearing, right? So again, if you're the listing agent, you want that, commission agreement all set. So as soon as, hey, I'm thinking of putting an offer in, what are you paying? You send it over to them. Here it is. Have your broker sign it, send in the offer. Easy, right? That commission agreement has replaced what was in the MLS. Now, again, we have had some incidents where, it's Dalton Wade on the buyer side. Somebody, like the Berkshire Hathaway, like the agent didn't really understand it. It's not easy. There is some confusion, right? So try to help them understand. The important thing is you understand, right? You understand how this all works and how it all comes together. All right. So again, that commission agreement, I am allowing you guys to sign those, or you can send them in and I'll sign them, whatever you prefer. You're also going to need that buyer broker agreement, property pre-touring agreement, or showing agreement, right? And we'll talk more about those shortly. All right, if you're under agreement prior to the removal of the co-broke data from your MLS, you will not need the commission agreement because it was already in the MLS, and you won't need a buyer broker agreement, right? So you don't need those. You'll get paid as if, there's kind of the old way. So you get paid without this, And then, but we're quickly moving into the new way where we need these documents. All right, so here's the new listing agreement. I want everybody to take a think through this. So section 8 is the same, right? So again, what are they paying? What is that seller paying, right? So let's kind of go through the two ways that the seller can offer compensation. Well, there's really three ways. So one way, let's just say we'll use 5%. So Dalton Wade, line 8A, 5%, right? And then, so they're paying the brokerage, Dalton Wade, both sides. That's, we're collecting from the seller, both sides, right? And then if we, so, section 9 talks about, that buyer broker represents the buyer. He might be negotiating against you, right? Kind of all that. And then we come down to section 10, right? Is what the seller is going to pay to buyer's broker, if anything at all. So we have A, right? Seller authorizes broker to offer compensation to the buyer's broker in the amount of, so let's say, line 8 is 5, here might be line 2% or 2.5%, or maybe 3, right? Then you're only making 2%, right? So this, if they check A, right, this is important. If they check A, the money is coming out of 8A, right? Dalton Wade got 5%, and then we paid out 2.5%. Now, sometimes sellers think, oh, I'm really paying 7.5%, right? Because they see this, now I'm paying, so what I used to do is just write in, the most seller can pay is 5%, and that would seem to appease them. All right, then we go down to 10B, right? 10B. So seller authorizes broker to offer compensation to buyer's broker from the seller, right? In the amount of 2.5%. We'll use that again. So then up top, right, in 8, it would be 2.5% paid to the listing brokerage, but then it's not running through the brokerage. It's just being paid directly by the seller. Everybody understand that? If you have any questions, type them in the chat box. We get to the question and answer. We'll go through that. Or C, no compensation will be offered to buyer's broker. They can do that. I mean, they don't have to offer, a commission, but again, like why not? Especially in this environment, right? We want you, because here's what's happening out there, and you should tell your clients this. Buyers are writing into the buyer broker agreement. They only want to see properties where there's compensation to their agent being offered. They don't want to even see something that doesn't have compensation, right? So it definitely will stifle, the demand for the seller's property. That's kind of what you want to communicate to them. So again, if you have questions on the mechanics of this form, which is the listing agreement, these are the 3 kind of relevant sections. I'm happy to answer them. All right. So again, kind of going back to the buyer broker, form. So there's 3 things, three different agreements that make us compliant, right? There's a showing agreement, right? There's a property pre-touring agreement, and then there's the full-blown buyer broker agreement. They're all in dot loop. They're there. After August 17th, we won't approve your file without one of those forms. You have to have them. I mean, there's 0 tolerance on this, guys, right? 0 tolerance. Like if your listing, or excuse me, a listing goes under agreement and they see who the buyer's agent is, you could get called by your MLS. If you don't have the buyer broker agreement, one of these 3 things, right? One of these 3 agreements, you're going to get fined, and the fines are expensive. The first fine is $1,000. And then the second fine, at least I've seen in a couple MLSs, you get kicked out. You're done. You're shut down. You're terminated. This is serious, right? This is serious because again, the Justice Department, like all this change came about for a reason. And the reason was certain people thought, hey, there's some anti-competitive behavior going on. So again, we want to comply, right? We want to this is not as bad as it could have been. What the Justice Department wanted and still may want is that the seller can't pay anything to the buyer's agent. Just it's banned, it's illegal. Seems wrong to me, but that's what they're angling for. So again, they're going to see how this kind of gets rolled out, how it's complied with. So again, we have to have one of those forms. I mean, and again, you know, there was an agent, I believe she got a call through Zillow and they wouldn't sign. Well, again, those are people, you don't want to work with them. You don't want to work with them because maybe they already had another agent, right? Again, and again, like the showing agreement and the property pre-touring agreement, they are benign. They're non-exclusive. They're not exclusively working with you. They can be for a short period of time. They can be for one day. It's just more really to disclose how much you're charging, right? And that, commissions are negotiable. Right. We've talked about the, seller compensation agreement and the seller's brokerage compensation agreement, right? Those are the two forms. When you're a buyer's agent, you need one of the two, right? Again, if the seller, let's just go back, right? If we go back to, right, if the seller checked 10B, right? See where it says from seller, then you're going to use seller to buyer broker agreement because the seller is paying it directly. Right? If they checked, right, they checked A, then the brokerage is collecting the money and they're paying. So now there's two ways, right? Before it was always paid to the listing brokerage and then they paid out to the buyer's broker. So now there's really a couple ways, three ways, right? The old way, which would be checking box A. Box B, the seller is paying, directly. It's not running through, the brokerage. Or the other way is through a credit, right? Concession. We'll talk a little more about that in a couple slides, right? They may want to offer a concession instead, right? We've seen where, they're getting 5%, right? And it should be the buyer, to buyer broker form, and then they've used the seller, right? So the seller's like paying double. So there's some still kind of not everybody's up to speed, but again, the important thing is when you're working with a buyer, right, and the seller or the brokerage is compensating you, get that form signed before you submit an offer, because once you submit an offer, then it's signed and then you may not get it, and then you're kind of hoping you're going to get paid. We don't want to, hope is for church, right? We don't, we want something signed. We want to make sure, we get paid. All right. Then we have the compensation disclosure. So that's really, let me go on to that, right? So that's these two forms. So if you have a listing, right, signed under the old listing agreement, you need to give your seller this form, letting them know, basically, as a result of, NAR's proposed settlement agreement and related practice changes, the following disclosure is required in all listing agreements. Notice to seller, seller's agent compensation is fully negotiable and not set by law. That's it. And then if you had a buyer broker agreement already enforced before the changes, you need to, again, give your buyer this disclosure, same thing, letting them know, they sign it, we are compliant. Just kind of bring everybody, up to the new law. Let everybody, know, hey, this new law is in effect. It's just a disclosure, doesn't mean anything. When it means something, it means you let them know that, there are some new policies and procedures out there and commissions are negotiable, which they always were. All right. So some important things to remember, right? So listing agents, right? Again, get those compensations agreements signed by, you can sign on my behalf. I'll sign if you want, or the seller, right? Depending on how that listing agreement is executed, right? So if A is checked, 10A, right? We're going to use the brokerage to buyer brokerage agreement. If 10B is checked, then we're going to use seller to buyer broker agreement. So that get those forms signed. So when the buyer's agent says, hey, what are you offering? Oh, here it is. I got it here. It's easy, right? You're not scrambling around. Talk a little bit more about the showing agreement and the property pre-touring agreement. Those are non-exclusive, meaning people can sign more than one of them, right? And they're non-enforceable for all intents and purposes, right? If the buyer, in the end is the one responsible for paying and doesn't pay, it's very difficult to enforce because it costs more to enforce it than it does than our commission. So ultimately, right, you want to convert them, if you don't start with a buyer broker agreement, right, to the full-blown, exclusive buyer broker agreement. It's an exclusive relationship. The pre-touring and showing agreements, they're like dating, right? It's kind of getting to know each other, right? But the buyer broker agreement is more like, hey, we're married, we're engaged. It's more of a commitment on both sides, right? And then, the other way to potentially get compensated as a buyer's agent is through the seller concession, right? The seller concession. So there's always been seller concessions. It's nothing new, right? It's always been there, but kind of what's new now is that seller concession can be used to pay your commission. So again, right, you're going to write up, seller to pay, 3%, 10,000, whatever it is, for buyers' closing costs, prepaids, and non-allowables, right? Can't specifically state it's to pay your commission, right? Can't say that. Now, sometimes people will say, well, what if they don't then allocate the money to pay my commission? Well, here's the thing. You got the buyer broker agreement, right? Or you got the property pre-touring, you have an agreement. So then they're on the hook. You can give that to the title company and maybe you can, when close, hopefully, stuff like that's going to be very, very minimal, right? And then again, we just talked about this, but we'll hit it on it again. So for listing and buyer broker agreements entered into prior to 8/17, the old form, using the old forms, right? You need that compensation disclosure, right? Just one of these, it's one for the seller, one for the buyer. They're very, they're nothing. It's just telling them, hey, there's been some changes, commissions are negotiable. All right, just a couple things that have come up. So if you're a listing agent and you have both sides of the transaction, you need a buyer broker agreement, a showing agreement, or a property pre-touring agreement from the buyer, right? Again, you are working with the buyer. Every single buyer we work with, we need one of these three agreements, right? And again, when I say work with them, when we begin showing them homes, gotten a few questions on, hey, I'm setting up a property search. Do I need a buyer broker agreement? No. Nope. I mean, it's like if you're having a conversation with somebody on the phone, you don't need the buyer broker agreement. Or, when I say buyer broker agreement, I mean one of those three agreements. You only need it when you show them a property. Say you meet a buyer at an open house, right? Again, you don't need anything. You don't need a, showing agreement or property pre-touring agreement. You only would need that if you're writing an offer, if you're beginning to work for them, even if it's on that property, right? Or you're taking them out to see other properties. I was very, very good at meeting buyers off my open houses. So now, if I took them out, I'm, going to show them the first property, I need one of those three agreements signed. All right, so, again, the data is coming out. It's out in many. Once it's removed, then it triggers, needing the buyer broker, the property pre-touring, or the showing agreement, right? And then you're going to need to have a compensation agreement with either the seller or the seller's brokerage, right, to make sure you get paid. And again, I touched upon this. So again, if you're the listing agent, get those compensation agreements signed in advance. So when they say, hey, I'm putting an offer in, what are you paying? Here it is, right? It's easy. All right, and then NAR has some resources, bunch of questions, questions that certainly worth reading, but kind of all summarized here. All right, let me stop the share, go to the questions. All right, give me 1 second. Got a lot of hellos. Let's see the first questions. Thank you everybody for being here. Got almost 200 agents. It's awesome. Maria, yep, there will be a recording. It'll be up on the Join Dalton Wade website under, the on-demand training, probably tomorrow by, 2, 3 o'clock. We're not going over the buyer broker agreement in this meeting. Mary did a training on it today. So she is doing those, fairly regularly. So definitely you can attend that, and she'll go through all the forms, the particulars. But pretty straightforward. There's really not a lot different than what was there before if you kind of used it before. Let's see. Few AI people here. Hello, Mr. and Mrs. AI. All right, let's see. Can we walk over a case for a buyer agent who's going to show the buyer the new property? How do we start in .loop to get all those documents signed? Well, again, I mean, you're going to, send it through .loop or print it out and give it to them to sign and then put it back in .loop. So, again, just like you would deliver anything electronically, like again, the contract. So it's really no different than that, right? No different for that. So pretty straightforward. All the forms are in .loop, right? You can share it with your client, have them sign it. Pretty easy. There's a few updates, Diane, in terms of it is similar because again, it's not like a lot has totally changed, right? I mean, it's the same, and except now, there's been more questions, more answers. Let's see, can I give some good examples where agents are how offers proceeding from buyer? And can you give some good examples? What are agents asking? How are offers proceeding? Well, again, I mean, I think they're proceeding okay. Smart agents are making sure that they get something, that compensation agreement, right? Think of it like a FSBO, right? Think of it like a FSBO. So before, if we worked with a FSBO, it wasn't in the MLS, so we got something from them signed saying they were going to pay us, right? So this is exactly the same. So if the seller is paying, we're going to get that compensation agreement from the seller. If the seller has authorized their listing brokerage to collect the money, then we're going to get the buyer broker to buyer broker form, right? Then the brokerage is paying us. There's 3 ways we can be paid. One way is from the seller, right? Then we need the seller to buyer brokerage form. The other way is the brokerage is paying us, right? Then we need the brokerage to buyer brokerage form signed, or the third way is a concession, right? Then neither of them are paying us, but we are getting the money indirectly through the seller through that concession. Now the drawback, of the concession is now the property, if they're getting financed, has to appraise for more. Yeah, the listing package in .loop. Hey, Victor. Yep, it has all the forms. All the new forms are in there. So everything is in there. We've gone through, .loop in extensive detail. I got a new form that just appeared in my loop after I already sent the compensation agreement to the seller to sign. Okay, so you probably typed this in before I mentioned it. So the compensation disclosure, right, is for old listings, old listings. So what they're trying to do, right, is they're trying to bring everything up to, the new practice standards, right? So we want to give to people we've signed an old listing agreement with. We don't have to, do I have to redo it? No, you don't have to redo it. We have an agreement, it's in force, it's not changing, right? But what we do have to give them is the compensation disclosure, right? Letting them know commissions are negotiable. So it's not additional, it's kind of, if you signed an old listing agreement, you need the compensation disclosure, right? If you sign the new listing, then you need, one of those two things, the commission, seller to buyer broker, or, brokerage to buyer brokerage form. So those are the two. So again, sometimes other agents, we had one where, again, the seller was paying the brokerage, but then the agent sends over the seller right to buyer. Now, again, we don't really care that we sign that because, somebody's paying us, right? That's all that really matters. If you think about all, there's two things, right? One, we got to have that buyer broker agreement. And when I say buyer broker agreement, I mean showing agreement, pre-property, property pre-touring agreement, or the full-blown buyer broker agreement. We need, we need that, right? And then we need a commission agreement. How are we going to get paid? Who's paying us? All right, Arturo asks, what will happen with the closings after August 17th? Does the seller should pay the buyer's commission? Well, absolutely. I mean, they always do. It's all dictated by the listing agreement, right? If the listing agreement, whatever that says, right? We have the old listing agreement, and then we went through, the three pertinent parts of the new listing agreement, right? So again, it's really the listing agreement that kind of dictates it. But eventually, like all the old listing agreements, you'll either expire, close, right? So it will just be at some point, the new form. I wrote my first offer. Hey, Nikki, how are you? I wrote my first offer with the new rules and sent the contract commission agreement to our awesome support team before I sent it to my buyer for signature. I used the wrong form, so I'm glad I asked before I. Well, thank you. That's what they're there for. Again, if anybody has any questions, call support, call me, shoot me an email, and we'll help you. I mean, again, I mean, I can't tell you it's crystal clear. I mean, it's crystal clear to me because I have answered probably, 10, 15 questions every day for the last couple weeks. So, again, I kind of understand it. It goes back to, what our relationship is. Think of commercial, right? Commercial real estate. So commercial real estate, you never got paid, like there was no co-broke in the vast majority of cases. You needed a commission agreement, either from the seller, right, or from your buyer, or right. It's the same now. It's no different. No different. Hey, Laura, I had an offer on my listing and he asked what we were paying, and then he wrote the commission in the term. Okay, so that's a violation. That's wrong. That's again a non-knowledgeable agent. You should tell him. So why you can't, it's an ethics violation, right? And then writing something in the contract, like I didn't sign that, right? So we're not really part of the contract. Our names are on the contract, so the title company knows, who earned the commission. Let's see. So he also didn't ask about the commission agreement. What if my sellers agree today and he never requests? Again, I mean, hopefully the seller will still pay them. I mean, you should probably tell them and help them. Quite honestly, Laura, that's unfortunately what we're dealing with a little bit out there. It's just, people that don't really know what they're doing. It makes it hard, right? So help them out. All right. So Christina, how are you? What happens if the buyer does not deposit the agreed amount in the BBA when making the cash to close deposits? Does this suspend the closing? Probably. I mean, most definitely if, they're getting a loan, and obviously you'd give that buyer broker agreement to the title company. I don't know, because it probably hasn't happened yet. Um, who's responsible for the suspended closing? Will the lenders allow closing to be suspended and lose? Again, these are questions like, you know, I don't know. I mean, we're not there yet. Like, I'm sure we'll find out, right? Who will cover the legal expenses to enforce the agreement? So again, if you have the showing agreement or the property pre-touring agreement, I am not suing anybody because you can't win. You can win, but then the problem with those agreements, right, is that it costs more to sue somebody and spend all the money on the attorneys than your commission. But the buyer broker agreement is similar to the listing agreement or the purchase contract where, if we prevail, we then can collect our court costs and our attorney fees. So it has a little bit more, a little bit more, teeth to it. Now, and again, I mean, I don't really see like, I mean, I think we're thinking about the worst case here. And again, it's possible, but I think in most cases, it'll get worked out like many type of closings do, right? Maybe, you had agreed to 3.5%, 3%, and maybe you can only get 2.5% because they don't have the money, right? Or maybe the title company, somebody will kick in, or the lender or something, right? To kind of make it all work. Technically, the agreement is with the broker and not the agent, so I assume it would be the broker, right? I mean, I'm the one who has to, file the suit, so, we want to make sure we, have, that buyer broker agreement. Again, like if you're working with, the, if you're working with, the showing agreement or the property pre-touring agreement, they're think of it like this. They're a loose arrangement that is meant to be compliant. It's meant to have somebody sign. Like again, if you're meeting somebody online, it's probably hard to get them to sign the buyer broker agreement right away, right? Maybe after you work with them, they get to know you, you can upgrade them. But if it's a referral, right? If somebody you've worked with in the past and they tell them how great you are, maybe you can start right with the buyer broker agreement. Okay, so again, there really is no negotiating of, I mean, you can negotiate, right, Tammy, but again, you can't be like, when you say negotiate, I'm not really sure. Like, again, they can negotiate with you as the listing agent. Oh, I don't want to offer any commission. I only want to offer this, but it does need to be documented, right, in the listing agreement. So it's not like, I mean, they could say, I'm not offering any commission, and then, hey, have them submit, let me know. And it gets dangerous though, because, oh, now they're offering commission to this person, but not to this person. Remember, there's been some discussion about fair housing potentially. Oh, who's that person? Who are they? Oh, I don't want to, I'm not paying their agent. I don't like them. Right. So again, that shouldn't go down like that. It should all be in the listing agreement. When you get the listing, that's when you are going to hammer it out with them. And they're going to decide, not that things can't be modified, right? They can be. All right. So Jesus says, why do we need to switch to transaction broker when we are working in the same brokerage? If there is a listing agent and buyer's agent, I'm kind of confused here because transaction broker is needed. Right. Well, so again, the brokerage like owns everything. I own the listings, again, if you leave, I'll let you take them with you. Like, but technically the brokerage owns everything, right? The brokerage owns those buyer broker agreements. So again, right? So think of it like this, if there's two Dalton Wade agents, it's still Dalton Wade, right? It's not you and the other agent. It's Dalton Wade on both sides. That's why we need to be transaction brokers. Can't really have both sides unless you're a transaction broker. So that's why if we started as a single agent, right? Say your spiel is, hey, I'm a single agent on the buyer side. I'm a single agent. right? But I will need, if it is a Dalton Wade listing, I will need to transition to transaction broker then, right? Because I can't really, show you because we can't do it. All right, Pam says, so as long as we have one of the three, yeah, absolutely. One of the three, you are compliant, that's all. But again, please remember the showing agreement, the property pre-touring agreement, they are non-exclusive and they are for all intents and purposes not enforceable. You want, again, you might start there, right? You met somebody online, you start there, they love you, all's good, right? Hey, let's sign something more official. We're working well together. I don't know, it is hard to do that. But all right, let's see. If property pre-touring good enough, or do we eventually need, it is good enough. I mean, it's good enough if, MLS says, hey, I want to see the file, I want to see that buyer, agreement. Yeah, we're compliant. We're good. If we get, stiffed and they don't pay us, then we're not good, right? So that's really the distinction. The property pre-touring and the showing agreement, they are just really, it's some commitment, but it's not, as I said, it's dating. It's like, and could go nowhere, could go somewhere, right? The buyer broker agreement, much more, again, much more commitment. Do we create a new loop using the name of the client to send for signature? You can do that, or you can sign it yourself if you're comfortable doing that. You can sign them, right? I mean, you're an agent. I give you the authority to do that. As long as we don't have any issues, we'll continue to do it like that. Hey, Heidi, yep, that's all that's needed, right? That's all that's needed is the commission disclosure. That's it. That's all you need. Can we amend a exclusive buyer or pre-tour by striking out, adding new terms and the buyer? Yeah, yeah, I mean, you can do that, absolutely. Everything is modifiable, everything, it's just like any contract, any agreement, it can be changed through an addendum or a modification. Yeah, I mean, every time you work with a buyer, a new buyer, yeah, you could definitely start a new loop, Valerie, absolutely. If you're upgrading them from, showing agreement to buyer broker agreement, you can just use the same loop. So Victor says, so with all the listings that are in MLS prior to the 17th, we do not need to have a buyer's agent agreement or seller broker agreement. Yes and no. So this is where it got a little tricky. They use this 17th date as kind of the drop dead date, but most MLSs now, the commission data is out of there. So depending on when the commission data came out is when you need the new forms, right? So it's not so much the 17th. Say your MLS, I know you're in the beaches, right? Not exactly sure what day they took it out, but let's say it was, August 6th. So anything after August 6th, you need the new, the new documents. I think we answered this. Hey, Rosie, what do we need to do for active listings? Just get that commission, the commission disclosure signed and let them know that, there's been some changes, commissions are negotiable, you are all good. Okay, let's see, scrolling down for Missy, thank you. So it was always paid to a, yeah, so before, if you think about it, and again, I think this is where some of the confusion arises from. Many times, like, oh, it's in the MLS, I got paid. Like they didn't really, agents didn't really understand like how it really worked. Because I've seen, I've seen mistakes. One time I saw, he was a single agent and, he thought that's what his commission was, even though that was what a single agent who's representing the buyer would get, right? So again, so I think there was some confusion kind of how it all worked, but basically how it all worked previously was the seller paid the listing brokerage, and then the listing brokerage paid the buyer's agent, right? That's, and that was how it was done. And even if you go back, even it's about 11 or 12 months ago, before they had to pay something. They had to pay at least $1. That was another thing that kind of got us in trouble. Another one of NAR's, rules that just didn't really hold up. All right, so let's see. Stan says, but the buyer agent is not privy to the listing agreement. No, no, you're not. Nope, you're not privy to that, but you're gonna ask them, what compensation. I don't know why you would need that. I mean, again, like if you think somebody's not being honest, right? Honesty, if we go back to that, slide on agency, everything, we have to be honest in what we do always. When we cut corners and maybe do some things that are sketchy, that's when you get in trouble. Got to be honest to people. It works. Being honest is what we want to do, right? So again, like, hey, if they tell you here's the buyer, broker to buyer broker commission agreement, that's what you got to assume is correct. All right, John said I just did the listing agreement line. Yeah, that's fine. Perfect. It works, right? So again, what you're going to get from that seller as well, right? That's why, we're kind of now into real life examples, which is a great question by John Lynn, right? So you're going to get that, and then you're going to have them sign that seller to buyer broker, right? Whatever they're offering, you're going to get that signed really as part of the listing agreement, quite honestly. And then you are going to, when they're, ready to put an offer in, or if they're asking you, what are they offering? Here it is. You can email it to them. This is what the seller's paying. Easy. No, we can't use the Zillow pre-tour agreement. We don't want to use that. I don't know if that's compliant. I don't want to find out it's not compliant. You don't want to find out it's not compliant. Again, it seemed like even dummied down, because here's the thing. If we use the wrong form, right, there's a big fine. So what I know is that the realtor forms, those are their forms. That's what they're telling us to use. Like why Zillow has come up with this, just to, I love Zillow, right? But, just mucking it up, more questions. So no, we're not, that's not acceptable. This will be live, the recording, on the website tomorrow, if that's what you're answering. What if you had one of these other showing agreements and you showed a couple homes they want to put in an offer? Can you? Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, definitely. That's what you want to do. That's what you want. Obviously, they've enjoyed working with you, right? And yeah, I mean, that's again, it's negotiating, it's explaining your value, it's being more, more disclosure, more transparent, right? In terms of what we do and how we help them. It's all good. It's all good. I'm not sure exactly what you're asking, Brett. If maybe you can expand upon that. When I get down there, I'll answer that. I think they've come up with the three, Pam. Pam's asking, why do we need all three? Well, you don't need all three. You only need one, but they have all three. I think what they're trying to do is be somewhat sensitive that, not everybody's going to want to sign the buyer broker agreement right out of the gate. So they've come up with forms that are less, less of a commitment to get them to start working with you. Hey, Maria, how are you? Can the commission be paid by the? Absolutely. Marisa, can the commission be paid by the buyer? 100%. I mean, that's ultimately what the Justice Department wants, but we know, that's tricky because they may not have enough money to be able to do that. But yes, they can. Absolutely. There's nothing wrong with that. All right, Dan says, let's see. Dan says, so we are a single agent. No, we're not a single agent. So again, the two listing agreements, they're exactly the same. Exactly the same, except one, and this is no different than it was before, right? Except one says transaction broker and one says single agent. So depending on which one you choose is how you're representing them. That's why that whole agency now is more important than ever, and really understanding it and make sure you're using the right forms. We do have some forms. I will, let's take Mary's training. She's got the listing agreement, there's and then the buyer broker agreement, she does those, every week, every other week one. So, check those out, Shelley. They're usually at 11 a.m. So look for those. Hey, George. So rentals are, rentals, commercial land that's commercially zoned is all, exempt from any of these rules. Again, I mean, a buyer, signing, a buyer broker agreement with two brokers is doing that at their own peril because ultimately, they owe twice. So I don't know why anyone would do that. Um, you might ask them, have they signed with anybody else? Hey, Anthony, how do I communicate what is being paid as co-broke on my listings without breaking any rules? Easy, having one of those two forms, right? Having one of those two forms. Or telling, and those two forms are the, seller to buyer broker commission form or the brokerage to buyer broker commission form. Or you could say, hey, my seller will pay a commission, put it in as a concession. That's how you communicate by having that form signed. How existing, just, it's all dictated. Hey, Heidi's asking how existing sellers pay the buyers. It's all dictated. So these are contracts, right? And the contracts are already in place. So whatever is on, that old listing agreement, that's all good. What do we need to do for existing listings? Says Stella. How are you, Stella? So those, you're just going to get the commission disclosure, right? Commission, that's a disclosure. It's not an agreement. So an agreement typically is like a binding legal document. Disclosure is, hey, when I was an agent in Massachusetts, you had to give everybody you met, you had to give them a form that says, here's what I'm doing. That was their rule. So here, it's just a disclosure. It's just something, it's not an agreement. There's nothing, we already have an agreement with them through the listing agreement. Listings that have been transferred from broker to another, do we need to have these broker buyer agreements signed? It depends. Like if you use the old listing agreement, no. If you think of it like this, if you have the old listing agreement, what you need is that commission disclosure, right? If it's the new listing, then what you need is, okay, who's paying the buyer's agent? Either the brokerage is, then you need the brokerage to buyer brokerage, or the seller is, then you need seller to buyer brokerage. As listing agent, do we need to have a buyer's representation agreement in hand or just the compensation agreement? No, nope. So that's a good question, Jack. So here's the thing. So if it's your listing, right, and you are getting, it's all how the listing is documented, right? So let's use 5%, we're getting 5%, then you're getting 5% if you're representing the buyer. So then we don't need a commission agreement because Dalton Wade has the money, right? We collect the money and then we pay you, right? But if it's another brokerage's listing, you want to make sure you're going to get paid. If you bring a buyer, then you need that agreement to make. Before we knew we were going to get paid because the data was in the MLS. Now it's not there anymore. So we need a piece of paper, an agreement, right? Either from the brokerage or from the seller saying they are going to pay us. No, you can't do that, Brett. It can just be 3%. No bonuses, but if will be reduced. Yeah, I don't really think you can do that. I mean, obviously, again, you can modify it. You just want to keep it as simple as possible. Like again, sometimes like I don't want to find out when we send something into, they're going to audit this. They're going to look at this stuff. Trust me on it. You're going to get a call and you're going to ask to, produce the file. That's going to happen. Never really happened before. I don't think in my entire, you know, 15 years of real estate, I've ever been asked for like a listing agreement by the MLS. Ever, never. But now I know they're going to be doing that. So again, what you want to do is you want to just 3%. You do a modification. There's a space on all the agreements where you can add that in. It's right there. The transaction fee. She's asking, how do we add a transaction fee that is a flat fee to seller or buyer? Well, yeah, I mean, it's, 3% plus 395, right? Or, right, there's definitely a line in there for that. Yeah, I mean, one of those, one of those two agreements, the seller or so you need something that says, I mean, again, we're not part of the contract. So to be safe, we want um an agreement that they're going to pay us. Yeah, so again, like there's different practices. Jonathan says, I had the listing agent text me the compensation as soon as I requested a showing. Awesome. Great idea. That, or you could send over the commission agreement, right? The seller to buyer broker or the broker to buyer broker, right? I mean, again, everybody wants to know how they're going to get paid. Hey, Terry, you don't need anything signed by a renter. These rules do not apply to renters. Yunfi, how are you? Where can I find the video recording from the new forms classes from Phil? If you go to Join Dalton Wade, click on training, right? Go down to on-demand training. It's all there. Vacant land, commercial, hi Linda, how you doing? Vacant land, commercial, there's no documents. Nothing, you're operating under the old system. So you don't need a buyer broker agreement, strictly for residential. Yeah, one buyer signature, absolutely, that would be good. Yep. Let's see, in the real remarks, and can we say seller is willing to entertain any and all requests you put in an offer? No, I would not put that in there. Nope. Because again, like, I don't know these, like, I don't know, like, I don't know, but I don't want to find out either. I know they're very strict. We've already had a couple agents be fined because they didn't get the data out of there. You can't mention anything about compensation. What about out-of-town clients that you video or FaceTime? Again, I would think you wouldn't have because you're not really showing them a property yet physically. I'll find that out. That's a great question. But again, like you want something signed, right? Why are you going to do that without an agreement? We have to think about this differently. And I know we are used to operating kind of without this, but like why they're making these changes is because, and again, these changes are not that bad. They could have been dramatically worse. I'm telling you, they could have outlawed the seller paying anything. That's what they want. They want the buyer to pay. So think of the spirit of what they're trying to do. So why you want to go video something for somebody that you don't have an agreement with? It's better to have an agreement. Then you know they're serious. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's the whole thing. Hey, Adrian, can you lock a buyer or the buyer broker agreement for, yeah, they're, again, they're like a listing agreement. It's an agreement. It has, a start date and end date. ATM, my seller want to check 10C, no commission, but they are open to negotiating concession to buyers for buyer's agent. Where can that verbiage be written? Would this be on a compensation? Nope. So there is no compensation agreement because they didn't sign that. You would only use that if they signed 10B, check 10B. They didn't check 10B. Right? But in the field, right, there's a concession field now in the MLS, right? So you could put it, ask them, well, how much concession are you willing to give the buyer? Oh, I'm willing to give them, a $12,000 concession. You can put it right in that field in MLS. No, I mean, unless again, like, so they check 10C, right? But now they're like, okay, we're gonna offer, we really have had a lot less showings because we're not offering, any seller that doesn't offer compensation. I mean, it's their choice, but again, like, what are they thinking? Why are they doing this? I think they're saving money, but there's a lot of client only to show houses that have compensation. But to answer your question, so no, unless you went back and you modified the listing agreement, right? And then you got the seller, to buyer broker form, then that's good. But without it being modified, the only way to pay a commission to the buyer's broker is through the concession. Well, I mean, technically, that's a good question. I mean, you probably should sign a buyer broker agreement because you are the buyer. And where can I ask for buyer agent commission? You're going to call up the listing agent. You're going to ask them, what are you offering? Just like I forget who said, they requested a showing and the agent texted over what it was. That agent is on top of their game. Nope, you're all good, Stella. You don't. Stella says I have a buyer under agreement since July of 24 with a builder. Do I need to do anything? Nope, you're all good. Nope, you're all good. Now, if you have a buyer broker agreement with that buyer in place, then you would need to give them the commission disclosure, letting them know commissions are negotiable. But if you don't, and you've just been working with them, you should be good. Hey Tia, how are new construction transactions going to change? I mean, I think the biggest way they're going to change is no more bonuses, from what I can tell. Bonuses are not allowed. You can't put, 3% plus bonus. Right now, really maybe what they do is they up the percentage to kind of, put it in, you know, put the bonus in the commission. Yep, I believe you can share properties with a potential buyer without a buyer broker agreement. I think you can talk with people on the phone. You don't need anything. It's when you physically go and show them a property you need them to sign something. Easiest way is always us use a, yeah, I mean, that is right. Again, A is kind of the way it was before, simpler. On the old listing agreement, we need the compensation disclosure, then we need to submit to compliance on dot loop. That's all. That is it. Now, again, you probably should have, right, because you're, I'm assuming, getting some requests for showing, and now they're going to ask you, hey, what are you paying? Right? So you need to tell them, or you need to send them, depending on, the old agreement, the brokerage collected the money. So you were going to send them, the broker, to buyer brokerage form. You're never gonna, Laura's asking, what about if you're trying to get a hold of the listing agent to see if they are paying anything before drafting your offer and you can't get a hold of them? How do we know if the listing agent is being fair with their response, with the agents want to put in offers? We'll never know, but ultimately, like, if you feel that somebody's doing shady things, right, they're not being, honest, they're not being legitimate, then you're gonna file a complaint probably after you close. And then, somebody will request the documents, and hopefully, they told you the truth. Well, I mean, there's always been, Laura's asking about agents that don't respond. There's always been agents, listing agents. See, I hate people like this that are in this industry, and this is why, these changes sometimes are necessary, because they're all about themselves. And why they don't return your calls, because they want to get both sides, and they figure, oh, maybe that buyer will call me. I would call their broker. I would call their broker and complain to them. Sellers, if the buyer agreement is signed for 3%, but seller agree to pay only 2%, can I change? Yeah, absolutely. You can modify it. Yep. Yep. You can definitely do that. Or you can charge your client 1%. Right. I mean, we're getting paid for work, right? That we're not like, and sometimes there's more work, sometimes there's less work. But I mean, so again, it's a personal choice. If you want to, modify it, you can. If you don't, then, the buyer's on the hook. Hey Raquel, well, this will be live tomorrow on the website, so you can check out the part you missed. Check back, probably after 2 o'clock. We usually get them up there pretty quick. Hey Mike, can we show Dalton Wade Real Estate Group listings? No, no, you can't. Can't do that. Can't do that. Nope. You need the buyer, and I say buyer broker, one of those three things. Again, like, we want to err on caution, right? We need that signed. I mean, again, even if you're the listing agent, and you're getting both sides, you need a buyer broker agreement. Every single buyer, we need, one of those three agreements, no exception. Hey Nikki, well, maybe, maybe what you have to do is, have that buyer broker, agreement for 4%, and then the bonus is kind of in there. I don't know, I mean, what I've been told and I've heard repeatedly is that the most you can get is what is on that buyer broker agreement. If the seller's offering 3%, right, and you're only charging 2, you only get 2. If the sellers of FISBO don't want to give me the listing but wants me to bring the buyer and they pay me it will be seller to buyer brokerage agreement at the time. Absolutely. You got it. That's exactly what it is, Liddy. That's it, 100%, right? Yeah, absolutely. You need that seller to buyer brokerage. It's just like before. It's the same thing. They just called it a compensation agreement. Now they call it a seller to. Hey, Tom, we have two closings scheduled next week from a new just to confirm. Um, I mean, the only thing you would need to do is if you had a buyer broker agreement in place, then you would need to give them that disclosure. If not, there's nothing else needed. I'm assuming that those listings were in the MLS and had compensation offered, right? So that's why you don't need anything. I have a buyer closing on a new build in October. We went under contract this year. Does my client now have to sign a buyer broker commission agreement? No, nope. You're already under agreement. You don't need that. Now, again, if you fell out of contract and you started showing them new properties, yes, they would. What if the seller does not want to pay anything? I'm assuming, hey, Stacy, how are you? What if the seller does not want to pay anything? I'm assuming you're speaking as a buyer's agent, then, well, then hopefully you're going to get it out of, a concession. Maybe they're willing to do a concession. Or if not, if they're not, then your buyer's got to pay you. And maybe that's not the house for your buyer. Where do I find the owner's authorization? I think that is somewhere in .loop. I'm not sure exactly where. When you say, do we need to have a form to sign? Can you be a little more specific? I mean, maybe it's for, I guess, working with a buyer. Hey, Tammy, if you type it in again, I'll answer it. Stella says, I'll close out the 28th of this month with a new construction that went under contract last month. Do I need to do anything? Nope, you don't need to do anything unless you signed a buyer broker agreement with them. And then you need to give them that compensation disclosure, commission disclosure, not an agreement, just a disclosure. Let's see, can we add in other terms on the B that they will only have to pay a fee if they choose to make an offer on a home that sellers are not offering compensation, and that is strictly their choice? Yeah, I believe that would be safe. So just to be clear, you take them to the house, get the disclosure signed first, and decide on listing agreement to sign, then sign BBA. I'm not sure on that. So I'm not sure what you're asking, Amby. Confused on that. I was more, guess you're talking about Mary's training. She went too fast. Again, if anybody has any issues with kind of filling these out, do a sample, send it in, read the form. Happy to comment, if something is in there correct. The buyer agreement does not have the buyer agreement does not have three parts. The buyer agreement is three different agreements. They're three separate agreements. All three make us compliant. The showing agreement, the touring agreement, those are non-exclusive agreements. They're really not enforceable because the cost to enforce them probably exceeds the commission. The buyer broker agreement is exclusive, right? They're only working with you. And again, if they didn't pay us, we could enforce it. So you only have to sign one of the three. right? You may upgrade from one to the buyer broker agreement, right? So think of it, I said this a few times, it's like going on a date, dating, the touring agreement, the showing agreement, getting to know them, seeing if you work well with them, seeing if you're hitting it off. Like, sometimes we meet clients and like, it's not a good fit. It's not a good fit. Sometimes it's a great fit. And then, you're proving your value to them, and then they sign the buyer broker agreement. Thank you, Joanna. I appreciate that. We're trying here. How about for VA buyer, can you charge commission to them? That's a good question. I have to get back to you on that. I haven't gotten that one. I believe you probably would want to go with the concession, right? Or get the seller to pay, right? Or the brokerage to pay. All right. So Diane, in regards to agency, are you allowed to tell a buyer a problem that you see with a home, possibly something? No, I mean, absolutely. If you see something wrong, you definitely want to tell them no matter how you're representing, right? I mean, that's called, diligence, skill, right? You don't want you're right. Those are what we do. We're skillful, we're diligent, right? So yeah, you can definitely tell them, and it doesn't matter which, how you're representing them. If either way works, tell them. They need to know. I want to make sure I understand the seller to buyer broker signed and uploaded. Nothing is uploaded to MLS. Nothing is, hey Kevin, nothing is uploaded. There can be no commission data whatsoever in the MLS. So this is all outside the MLS. Right there. This is not something that you upload into the MLS. This is outside of the MLS. Where can we ask a question? Phil, I think he doesn't see text here. Not sure what that means. Please, Kelly is asking, hey, Kelly, please tell me the name, date, bottom of the page for the most updated. Those are not no, it's 7/24, right? Everything was updated in July. Yeah, that's EBB, right? 7/24. Those are the most current ones. So Rose is asking, how's that applied for new construction where commission is paid? Right. So I mean, again, if it's something you're already under agreement, you don't need anything, right? If it's new, you probably want the commission agreement from them. I mean, they act as both seller and brokerage, so either one is going to work. Janice saw on Facebook that an agent is going to end all of her asking prices with a 2 or 3. Is that some type of code? Like, are you kidding me? I mean, like, again, get these thoughts out of your head, guys. This is wrong. This is again, think of this. Stuff like what Janet just mentioned goes again. Like, I think agents are struggling. What is the spirit of why did this all happen? This happened for a very specific reason, right? It happened for a reason. And now, right, we've come to a settlement, an agreement, right? But when people start doing things like, oh, it's 2 or 3, right? Those are all things that are getting around the spirit of what's trying. So I have that's bad. That's bad. That's going to go wrong for that agent. Don't do that. I mean, they can call you and ask. It's not like that agent probably is lazy and doesn't want people calling them. So they're giving some code. It's unbelievable. Yinfi says, if I represent the buyer to purchase a new developed house, the buyer's broker commission agreement needed. Again, so it all depends on what the listing agent signed. But for you, it doesn't really matter, right? What you want is either the seller to buyer broker agreement or the broker to buyer broker agreement. You want some agreement, right? There's only two people that can pay you or pay us, the seller or the brokerage. Indirectly, they collect the money from the seller, right? So depending on how it's structured, you need one of those two agreements. But again, you are going to ask the listing agent to provide it. There's no, hey, Rob, how are you? There's no advantage or disadvantage. It's just, again, the listing agreement dictates. Let's talk about this from the listing side, right? So the listing agreement, remember we went through that. So 10A says the brokerage is collecting the money, 5 and 2.5. Then we need, or you would need to provide the broker to buyer rep agreement. All right, so the seller now checks 10B. They're going to pay directly. Then we need the seller to buyer rep agreement. So depending on how that listing agreement is set up, dictates which agreement you're going to need for the buyer's agent. There's no, Stanley, how are you? There's no such thing as MLS fees. So again, these are misnomers terms. There's no such thing as MLS fees. They are a way of reducing your commission, right? So 2.5% minus $300 is if you, and it's a $10,000 property, right? Excuse me, a $500,000 property, 2.5%, that would be 12,500 minus 300. Really, what they're offering you for commission is 12,200. There are no MLS fees. Now, again, you could still see transaction fees being charged. That's a good one. Thank you, Janet. So Janet looked probably on the NAR website. So you do, if you video the house, it looks like you do need to have them sign something. I think Linda had asked that question. So good one. I learned something. Awesome. That's how you would do it, Laura. Just like that. Yep, just like that. Yeah. Hey, Maria. Good question. It's a good thing in a way, right? Again, like, in other states, like taking somebody out with a buyer without a buyer broker agreement is unheard of. Unheard of. So it's harder here for us. Like if you've already been doing that, it's like, what's the big deal? But so many times, like we just took them out and then we would get jilted, right? They'd use somebody else, or they'd go to the listing agent directly. Now there's none of that. There's none of it. Thank you, Victor. I appreciate it. Thank you. Trying here. All right, Eddie, how are you? Phil, to me, this change is good. As an agent, I wouldn't want to list a property without a listing agreement. Now that it's necessary. There you, Eddie, you nailed it. He nailed it. He nailed it. That's exactly what it is. Right? I mean, you're not working with a seller without something formally in place. So why would you do it with a buyer? So now we can't. Hey, Lacey, let's see. So for my listings that were active before in the old system, I need to enter the buyer broker commission in the seller compensation field. No, nope, no. Okay, I'm going to take you through it again. Nope, that's not how it works. So basically, if I'm assuming on the old listing, the seller was paying both us and the buyer's broker, right? So what you need from them, if that is the case, which I'm assuming it is, you need, right, they're paying us. the gross amount, and then we are paying the buyer's brokerage. So then we need the brokerage to buyer brokerage commission. So when they call you, right, they call you, that buyer's agent calls you, Lacey, and they say, oh, what are you offering? Here it is. Here's the document, right? They're going to want that document. Just like when you're a buyer's agent, you want that document. Without that document, you don't have anything. You need an agreement. Somebody who's paying me. Oh, nobody's paying me. Well, then, okay. Nobody's paying me. The seller's not paying me. That is their right. Well, I'll ask and see if I can get it as a concession. Oh, they're not willing to give a concession. Then your buyer's got to pay you. So it doesn't go in the seller concession field because I'm assuming they're already paying. It's who, if they're paying the brokerage, the gross amount, then we are paying that out, right? If they're not, and it's 10B, then you need the seller to buyer broker. And again, I know some of this is confusing. I've been working with it for a bit, so it's clearing up a little bit, but we'll get through this. We'll figure it out. Yeah, Adriana, it is definitely more work. I mean, my approach, not that I'm out there showing buyers, but I would only be calling on the houses they're interested in. I wouldn't call because it is a lot more work. One agent was telling me he used to, schedule his showings like at 10:30 at night. Well, now he's got to call because he's calling on every listing. I think that'll get old quickly. I mean, I remember taking one couple out. I must have taken them out, showed them 50 houses. I don't think they ever bought anything. I would have had to call 15 list. No, I'm only, I mean, again, everybody can do what they want. You want to call the listing agent before you're showing, find out what they're offering? Absolutely can do that. But I would only do it on the ones where they're ready to put an offer, they're interested. Stanley's asking, when publicizing a seller's willingness to offer a concession in the MLS weaken our negotiations? What if a seller changes his mind to not offer a concession later? Well, I mean, I guess they can do that, but I mean, obviously you're putting that in the offer, right? It's going to be in the offer. Like you can't put in the offer like, oh, you're going to pay me, 2.5%. Can't do that. Can't put in the offer, seller to pay a concession of $10,000 for buyer's agent commission. Can't do that. But what you can do is you can say, hey, seller to pay $10,000 of, buyer's closing costs, prepaids, non-allowable, non-allowables. But remember, you have the buyer broker agreement. That's the whole thing. That's what they want. They want, like they're trying as hard as they can to separate what a seller pays and what a buyer pays. That's the gist of this whole lawsuit. Now, they could have gone a step further. They didn't. That's not to say they might not in the future. I hope to God they don't. Meaning, it's illegal for the seller to pay anything towards the buyer. Maybe they can still do a concession. But the seller paying the buyer's agent, that's potentially out. But that's not where we're at. Yeah, someone had mentioned that's a good one. Thank you so much. I think that's well said. He's saying, what about a video showing? For example, FaceTime, WhatsApp, or video call if the showing is open to a wide audience, such as Facebook Live, or video post to social media that has a wide audience. No BBA would be needed. If you provide a generic virtual tour link for the listing agent, that would not trigger the requirement either. However, you're physically entering a home to deliver a live virtual tour for a specific buyer, then yes, a written agreement would be needed. All right, Tony says if a buyer signs to build a new construction with a builder and I'm representing them, but the builder will not be putting the house in MLS, is the buyer broker agreement required? Yeah, I mean, I believe, yes, it is. It is. Again, I can double check that for you, Tony. I believe it's required because we are part of the MLS. So Mike is asking, so you're doing an open house for another brokerage, right? Again, which is fine. Somebody can come in you're doing it on behalf of the seller. It's only if you start to work with them, like if you're going to submit an offer on that property, or you're going to take them out and show them some other properties, you would need the buyer broker agreement. Hey Moses, if my buyer broker agreement is 1%, I submit an offer on a property the listing agent, can I modify? Yeah, you can do that. You can do that. That might be hard to do because, the buyer might say, well, hey, I could get that 2%, in a reduced price. So maybe it's better to try to get the higher percentage right out of the bat. Hey, Sergey, if an unrepresented buyer wants to buy my listing but refuses to sign any agreements with me, what are my obligations besides showing the property to them? Can I write the offer on their behalf, or should I tell them to hire an attorney or another agent? Yeah. I mean, again, they're gonna have to sign something with somebody. So why not it be you? Or what you can do is like, and I believe Shelley's here, right? So Shelley, basically that was a similar situation where the buyer's like, oh, like I can buy the house for less. I don't use a buyer's agent. Again, these are all misnomers. These are all people's like, lack of understanding, right? Because again, the listing agreement is already signed, and the listing agreement, Shelley had was 4%, 4 and 2, right? So she got a non-brokerage relationship. So the guy was willing to sign that, right? She's getting nothing from him, but the seller's paying. So like, again, people don't really understand like the mechanics, right? So it sounds like she's going to get 4%. She's got both sides. Thank you, Nelsie. Appreciate it. All right, let's see. What about closings? Yes, you would. Yep. If you're representing a seller and an old listing agreement was signed, Maria, you need the, commission disclosure. All forms are in dot loop. Thank you, Vicky. Vicky's there on support. Thank you, Marielle. Appreciate it. Oh, thank you, Susan, for putting that in. Appreciate that. Thank you, Stella. I'm trying here. Getting a few tough questions, but not too many. For new construction, does the seller agent have to sign the broker to broker form? I know it's hard to get them to sign docs sometimes. Well, again, all these things can be signed in advance. Like think of you as a listing agent, get them signed in advance. Then it's all signed and send it over. Think of the buyer, excuse me, the broker to buyer broker and the seller to buyer broker. Think of those forms as replacing what was in the MLS for commission. That's what they're doing, right? So instead of it, it was in MLS. Now we have a piece of paper. So depending on who's paying it, which is dictated by the listing agreement, you get one of those signed. So Stella says, so I have a listing of a vacant land. Do I have to add the commission disclosure? If it's residential vacant land, then yes. If it's zone commercially, no. When you get into a new build agreement next week, the builder has a commission for, do we still need I would say you'd want the commission agreement, Shelley. It's safer, right? It's safer. I mean, again, like oftentimes in every builder, their contracts are different, but I mean, usually it's in there, right? But, it's better to have it. I mean, without it, you just never know. If you have it, then we can sleep well at night. We don't have to worry. What is the difference between 10A and 10B? Why would a seller opt to choose B over A? There really is no difference, right? Again, I think this is one of the this is one of the fallout, Nizrin, of the settlement agreement, why they've structured it like this. So what they're trying to get away from is the seller paying, paying the brokerage, the listing brokerage, and then having the listing brokerage pay the buyer's agent. So this way they can pay themselves if they want. But there really is, I mean, financially to the seller, there is no difference between A or B. I believe that is the case, right? They've come up with the three agreements, right? Because they wanted to make it theoretically easier to get somebody to sign something, right? You meet somebody on Zillow or, Facebook, and then you're going to ask them to sign, the full-blown buyer broker agreement. That might be harder than getting them to sign a showing agreement and starting the process with them. Okay, great question, Mel. How are you? What documents do we provide to a buyer's realtor for an offer on an existing listing, since we are not getting a compensation agreement? So again, if the offer was when the data was in the MLS, you don't need anything, right? But if the data has been taken out of the MLS, right, there's no more commission agreement, and your seller has agreed to pay, right, your brokerage to then pay the buyer's agent, then you need the broker to buyer agent agreement. Because think of it like, right, the buyer's agent, like, now the commission data is out of the MLS. How am I going to get paid? Who's paying me? I need something. I need a document. I need an agreement that you're going to pay me. Just like with commercial, oftentimes, the seller didn't pay, so they get it from the buyer. And if the seller did pay, then there would be an agreement. Ambi says very confusing. It's not confusing. It's not confusing. It's understanding what the relationships are. I'll try to summarize it. If you have a listing, right, like the new form can go down 3 ways, 4 ways, really. Way one, seller pays the brokerage, and out of that money they're paying the brokerage is paying the buyer's brokerage. That's one way. Second way, seller is paying the buyer's brokerage, right? That's, you would check 10B. 10B is checked. Then you need seller to buyer brokerage agreement. Third way, concession, right? Concession, right? As part of closing cost concession. And then fourth way, they're not offering anything. That's it in a nutshell. And then that's the listing side. And then when you're working with a buyer, you're going to get some form of buyer broker agreement, showing agreement, property pre-touring agreement, or full-blown buyer broker agreement, right? And then from the listing side, you are going to get one of those documents I just mentioned to ensure you get paid. You can't, I mean, I'm not sure when you say can't ask in showing time, I mean, you can't put anything in showing time about commission. I mean, you could maybe send, the listing agent a question via showing time and asking if they're paying commission. I don't think that's incorrect. Thank you, Susie. I appreciate it. I think a little nervous that they got that data out of, meaning like the list out of the MLS. I don't know. Some of these questions, like again, I don't know. Like, these are, I mean, they're great questions, but like, do I know? Like, if you send somebody an email and you put it in a, like, is that a violation? I don't know. Are there many agents leaving now? Well, Phil is not a fan of NAR. Phil. So unfortunately, we're here in Florida, most of us, right? So, when I was an agent in Massachusetts, the MLS was owned by the brokerages, right? And they followed NAR guidelines, but you didn't have to be part of NAR. You didn't have to be part of a board. You were just an agent. Here in Florida, unfortunately, it is a um, um, if one of my agents, you know, is late in their dues, or they suspend the whole office. So you have to be part of NAR and a board and the state of Florida Realtor organization to get access to MLS. Now, I just saw somebody sent me yesterday, there was a lawsuit filed in Michigan disputing just this. So depending, every state is different. So you have states like Massachusetts, they are not, the MLS is non-NAR controlled. Then Florida and many other states, MLS NAR controlled. So to be part of the MLS, you got to be part of NAR. But maybe that'll break down too. Who knows? Who knows? I mean, personally, I see no value myself. Here's what I get out of NAR. I get the legal hotline, the Florida legal hotline. That's good. We have the lockbox system. That's good. We used to know we would get paid because the commission data was in the MLS. That was good, but that's gone. We have the code of ethics, which I think is some benefit, but again, like, I always operated honestly. So yeah, I hear you. I hear you. But like we heard a while ago, Redfin like was leaving NAR. That's in states where NAR isn't in control of the MLS. They have not left NAR in Florida. They can't, because then they can't access the MLS. Yeah, check the recording if you missed something. If a buyer is looking to pay any compensation to a buyer agent, which would be the more likely scenario? Buyer agent is relaying his work only on listing agent's good faith to pay whatever he or she wants to pay. So buyer agent will have to call every single listing to learn how to handle and not work for free. Some listing agreements are very greedy, and it may not be worth to help him or her sell the property. So it's a good question. I mean, again, we're supposed to have some agreement with the buyer. The theory is they're supposed to pay us when the seller is unwilling to. Um, we have to kind of see, we're still like, I'm going to do probably another training next week, and then maybe kind of, we've done a bunch in a row now, but a few more, as we kind of get into more of the mechanics of kind of how all this works and what I'm hearing and what some of the, most of the problems I'm hearing now seem to be more around other brokerages and, their agents really not knowing what to do and how to deal with this. But we can't help that. I mean, it is what it is. But just try to communicate, try to find out. Mike's asking about doing open houses. I'm not sure you need anything to do an open house. I mean, I don't know. Obviously, if you're doing it for Dalton Wade, then you don't need anything unless you're going to begin to work with that buyer. You are, you're writing an offer. Thank you, Raquel. Probably not. I mean, um, again, I don't know. I mean, again, they could. I mean, then the question is, how do we then enforce like the showing agreement or the property pre-touring agreement? As I've said several times, a few times, they're hard to enforce. So, again, hopefully they're willing to submit the offer with you. Thank you, Nora. I appreciate that. Thank you, Mel. Appreciate that. All right, let's see. Will the buyer be able to finance the commission for the buyer's agent? Yeah, absolutely. That's the whole seller concession thing. That's how you do that, right? I mean, they're grossing up the price of the home, right, to pay the agent. So yeah, that's exactly how that will work. Now, the only potential problem with that is now that, especially if they're getting a loan, then the house has to appraise for more. Sometimes I've seen, like it's under agreement for, 500 and then there's a $15,000 concession. They say the houses, they appraised it at 485. So Mike, I'm not sure about other brokerages, what they're doing. All right, let's see. All right, I think I've answered all the questions. All right, any last ones? Thank you, Steve. Type away. All right, we're finishing up. Let me know. We're just at 8 o'clock. All right, Sylvia, good seeing you. Jeff, thank you. Hang in there, guys. Keep going. If you have questions, call us, call support. We're here to help you. All right, everyone. Good night. Thank you. Enjoy. Appreciate it. Bye, guys. Thank you.